Your neighbor just pulled into the driveway in a brand new car. Nice house, nice life, and in about 18 months, they're going to be financially destroyed. You just don't know it yet, and neither do they. And here's what's strange about this. We're pretty good at spotting obvious financial problems. Someone loses their job, you hear about it. Someone gets evicted, you notice. But there's this other kind of financial collapse, the slow, quiet kind, that hides behind normal life for years before it finally cracks open. And the signs? They're not what you think. They're not dramatic. They're not obvious. They're small, slightly off behaviors, things that feel almost normal, until you understand what they actually mean. Most people walk past these signs every single day. They see them in their neighbors, sometimes in their friends, occasionally in people they're close to, and they don't register anything unusual, because the signs aren't loud. But once you know what to look for, you can't unsee it. And look, this isn't about judging anyone. Money is complicated. Life is messy. People make decisions under pressure that look very different from the outside. That's real. But there's a reason it matters. Because these patterns, they don't just live next door. Sometimes you start recognizing them a little closer to home. And that's the part that actually stings. So let's go through them, carefully. 13 signs that someone is quietly, silently struggling with money, even when everything looks completely fine on the surface. Before we get into the signs, we need to talk about something most financial content completely skips over. Why do people hide it? Because understanding that one thing, that question right there, changes how you see everything else. It changes how you read people, how you read situations, and honestly, how you read yourself. Here's the truth. Financial struggle carries a weight that almost no other problem carries. If someone breaks their leg, people bring food. If someone loses a family member, people show up. But if someone is drowning in debt, quietly terrified about next month's rent, silently watching their savings disappear, they tell almost no one. They smile, they show up, they keep going, and it's not weakness. That's the thing people get wrong. It's survival, social survival. Because money, in most cultures, in most neighborhoods, in most families, is tied directly to identity, to status, to whether people respect you or quietly pity you. And nobody wants to be pitied, so they perform. They maintain the appearance. They keep the surface smooth even when everything underneath is collapsing. There's actually a name for this in behavioral psychology. It's called impression management. The idea that humans will go to extraordinary lengths to control how others perceive them. And when it comes to money, that instinct goes into overdrive. Think about it. People will take on debt to avoid looking broke. Let that sit for a second. They'll spend money they don't have to avoid looking like they don't have money. That's not irrational, by the way. It's deeply, painfully human. Because the social cost of being seen as struggling can feel larger than the financial cost of the debt itself, at least in the short term. And that short-term thinking? That's where it starts. That's where most of the signs we're about to talk about actually come from. Not from bad people making stupid decisions. From normal people trying to protect something fragile. Their image, their dignity, their sense of who they are. So when you see these signs in someone, the correct response isn't judgment, it's recognition. Because these patterns don't appear out of nowhere. They have roots, they have reasons. And sometimes, quietly, if you're honest with yourself, they have a little bit of you in them too. That's what makes this uncomfortable and useful. All right, let's get into it. The first sign is one almost everyone misses because it looks like success. New things. Constantly new things. New car, new phone, new furniture showing up on a Tuesday afternoon. And on the surface, fine, right? People buy stuff. That's normal. But here's what you're actually looking at when someone is perpetually upgrading. They're not buying things. They're buying relief. There's a specific emotional hit that comes from a new purchase. Psychologists call it retail therapy. But that phrase is way too soft for what's actually happening. It's a dopamine spike, a brief reset, a few hours or days where the financial anxiety quiets down because something new and shiny is now in the picture. The problem is it fades, fast, and then you need another one. People in genuine financial distress often spend more, not less, because spending is the only thing that briefly makes the feeling go away, and that's the trap. The very behavior that feels like relief is quietly making everything worse. Second sign. They talk about money constantly, but always in the abstract. I'm going to invest soon. Once things settle down, I'm going to sort out my savings. I've been looking at some options. You notice they're always in a planning phase that never seems to arrive. Always about to do something, never actually doing it. That gap between talking about financial action and taking it is often a sign that the real situation feels too overwhelming to face directly. So instead, you narrate a future version of yourself handling it. It feels almost as good as doing it, almost. Third sign, they're weirdly generous at strange moments. This one surprises people, but overspending on others, picking up the tab unexpectedly, buying gifts that seem slightly too expensive for the occasion, insisting on treating people, this is sometimes a financial red flag, not a sign of abundance. It's called compensatory spending. When someone feels internally inadequate about their financial situation, they sometimes overcorrect publicly. The generosity isn't fake. The feeling behind it is real. But the timing and the scale of it, that's the signal, because genuinely comfortable people don't need to perform generosity. They just do it quietly when it makes sense. Fourth sign, they never talk about the future in concrete terms. Not vague future, specific future, like retirement, or buying a house, or what they're going to do in 10 years. Comfortable people think about the future because the future feels like something they're building toward. When someone is financially stretched, the future feels threatening, so they avoid it. The conversation drifts. They change the subject. They make a joke. It's subtle, but it's consistent. Fifth sign, and this one is sharp. They react to other people's financial wins in a way that's slightly off. Not obviously jealous, not dramatic, just a small flatness when you mention something good. A slightly muted response when a friend gets a promotion or buys a house. It doesn't read as mean, it reads as tired. Because when you're quietly struggling, other people's progress doesn't inspire you. It just makes the gap feel wider, and that's an exhausting thing to sit with in real time, in front of someone while trying to look happy for them. Most people won't notice that micro reaction, but it's there. Sixth sign, their relationship with time and money is inverted. What I mean is, they're always available, always free, always able to drop everything. And that sounds fine, maybe even nice, but think about what it actually signals. People who are financially stable are usually busy. They're working. They're building something. They have things pulling on their time. Chronic availability, especially during hours when most people are working, can quietly point to income instability, inconsistent work, gaps they're not advertising. It's not a judgment. It's just a pattern worth noticing. Seventh sign, they lease everything. Car on a lease, furniture on a payment plan, electronics on a buy now, pay later scheme. And look, leasing isn't automatically bad, but when someone leases because they can't afford to own, what they're actually doing is optimizing for the appearance of the thing rather than the reality of it. A leased car in a nice driveway looks exactly the same as an owned one. That's the point. The optics are identical. The financial reality underneath is completely different. And here's the thing. They know that, which is why they rarely bring it up. Eighth sign. They're always one conversation away from a financial opinion, but they've never actually done anything. You know this person. They know exactly which stocks are overvalued. They have thoughts on real estate, on crypto, on interest rates, sharp opinions, confident delivery, and if you ask them what they personally have invested, the conversation gets vague very quickly. There's a psychological term for this, vicarious mastery. When someone can't achieve something in reality, they sometimes compensate by becoming an expert in the theory of it. It feels like participation. It sounds like knowledge. But it's a way of staying close to something without actually having to face the vulnerability of doing it. Real investors talk about their mistakes more than their opinions. That's how you know. Ninth sign. Small financial obligations make them visibly uncomfortable. Splitting a bill, chipping in for a group gift, paying back a small amount they owe. Things that should be completely frictionless aren't. There's a slight delay, a subject change. I'll get you next time that somehow never arrives. And again, this isn't about character. Most people who do this aren't trying to take advantage of anyone. They're managing a cash flow problem in real time, in public, while trying not to let it show. Every small transaction is a minor crisis they have to quietly navigate. It sounds small, but it isn't. 10th sign. They make a lot of noise about how little they care about money. Money isn't everything. I'd rather have experiences than things. I don't need much to be happy. Now, some people genuinely feel this way. That's real. But there's a specific version of this speech that shows up when someone is actively struggling. It's too rehearsed, too ready, like it's been said before, internally, many times. It's called sour grapes rationalization, the psychological tendency to devalue something you can't have in order to protect your self-esteem. If money is bad or unimportant, then not having it isn't a failure. It's almost a choice. Watch for the difference between someone who is quietly content with simplicity and someone who is loudly explaining why they don't need the thing they clearly wish they had. 11th sign. Their home tells two different stories. The front of the house is immaculate. The parts nobody sees aren't. This sounds almost too specific, but it's surprisingly consistent. When resources are limited and image still matters, people direct what little they have toward the visible surfaces. The lawn, the front door, the living room. The back porch is falling apart. The kitchen appliances are 15 years old. The guest bathroom hasn't been touched since they moved in. It's unconscious, mostly. But it's a very human response to scarcity. Protect what people see first. 12th sign. They borrow small things and never return them. Not money necessarily, small things. A tool, a dish they borrowed 6 months ago, an item they asked to use just for the weekend. This pattern, small, persistent, low-stakes borrowing, sometimes signals someone who is quietly rationing, who has learned to quietly supplement their life with other people's resources because buying new things, even small things, has friction attached. Nobody notices one borrowed item, but across time, across interactions, the pattern becomes visible. And the 13th sign. This one is the hardest to say because it's the most human. They look tired in a way that doesn't come from not sleeping. Financial stress has a specific kind of exhaustion attached to it. It's not physical. It's the exhaustion of constant calculation, of running mental numbers throughout the day, of waking up at 3 a.m. and immediately knowing exactly why, of keeping a face at work, at school pickups, at neighborhood barbecues, while internally managing a crisis nobody around you knows exists. You can see it if you look, not in dramatic moments, in quiet ones. The way they go slightly distant mid-conversation. The way a small unexpected expense lands on their face before they rearrange it. The way they laugh a half second after everyone else. It's subtle, and it's real. And if you recognize it in someone you care about, that tiredness deserves more gentleness than most people know how to offer. Because here's what none of this is about. It's not about finding broken people and labeling them. It's not a checklist to feel superior with. These 13 signs exist on a spectrum that most of us have touched at some point. Different seasons, different pressures, different versions of our own lives. The reason this matters, the real reason, is awareness. Because the earlier these patterns are recognized in yourself or in someone around you, the more options still exist. Financial holes don't start deep. They start shallow, and they deepen quietly over time, while everything on the surface looks perfectly fine. That's the part that gets people. Not the crisis moment. The long, slow slide they didn't see coming because they were too busy maintaining the appearance of being okay. So, here's where I want to leave you, not with a summary, not with a neat wrap-up, because this isn't really that kind of conversation. What we just went through, it's not a list of other people's problems. If you're being honest with yourself, and I mean actually honest, not surface-level honest, at least 2 or 3 of those signs probably landed somewhere close to home. Maybe in someone you know, maybe in a version of yourself from a few years ago, maybe in a version of yourself right now that you haven't fully acknowledged yet. And that's okay. That's the point. Financial struggle doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up with a warning label. It builds quietly behind normal life, behind a maintained appearance, behind the daily performance of being fine. And by the time most people realize how deep the pattern goes, they've been living inside it for years. The scary thing isn't the broke neighbor. The scary thing is how normal it all looks from the outside, how convincing the surface is, how easy it is to mistake the appearance of stability for the real thing, in other people and more dangerously, in yourself. Because here's what I've noticed after thinking about money and behavior for a long time. The people who are most financially vulnerable aren't usually the ones who know they're struggling and are trying to fix it. Those people are already moving. They're already facing it. The most vulnerable people are the ones who have convinced themselves, genuinely convinced themselves, that everything is basically fine, that it'll sort itself out, that next month will be different, that the pattern they're in isn't really a pattern, just a rough patch. That gap between where someone actually is and where they believe themselves to be, that's where the real damage happens. And closing that gap doesn't take a financial genius. It doesn't take a massive income or a perfect plan. It takes one thing: honest recognition, just seeing it clearly, without the performance, without the rationalization, without the carefully maintained story. That's harder than it sounds, but it's the only place anything real actually starts. Most people will hear all of this and still miss it. They'll file it under interesting and move on. Because that's easier. Because actually looking at your financial life clearly, without flinching, is uncomfortable in a way that most content doesn't ask of you. But a few people watching this will understand exactly what to do next. Not because I told them, because something in this conversation hit a nerve that was already there, waiting, and they'll do something with it. Something small, maybe, but real. If you're one of those people, you already know it. And if this is the kind of thinking you want more of, slow, honest, without the noise, then stick around. There's more where this came from, not louder, just clearer. That's all this is. That's all it needs to be.